Okay, my young friends, we are here to address some of the topics in Chapter 4 of your textbook, so that's where you can go if you've got any further questions or anything like that. We are going to be talking today about some aspects of ecosystems and communities. Now, if you'll remember, our biggest, most general level of organization in living things is the biosphere. Then we can go down to biomes, which we'll talk about a bit, but then we can get a little more specific and talk about ecosystems, which is all the living and non-living components of an ecosystem, an environment. And then a community, which is talking only about the various different living things, but kind of ignoring the non-living components. Okay, so we're going to focus on some different aspects of ecosystems and communities. First of all, we do need to talk about the role of climate in determining what kind of ecosystem you're going to have. It is the fundamental factor that determines what kind of ecosystem you're going to have. Now, make sure you understand the difference between climate and weather. Weather is the day-to-day conditions. Is it sunny? Is it rainy? Is it a tornado? Whatever. Whereas climate is the average long-term, year-to-year conditions in a region that are most determined by what kind of overall temperatures you have in the area and what amount of moisture, what amount of precipitation you get in the area. So that's the two main aspects of climate are temperature and precipitation amounts, how moist it's going to get, how much water there is for organisms to live on. So it's really climate that determines what kind of biome or ecosystem is going to develop in a given area. And you need to understand the two components of that and how it differs from just day-to-day weather. Now, factors that shape an ecosystem, that characterize an ecosystem, are both biotic and abiotic. And we've talked about those terms, the living things and the non-living components. Biotic factors are, of course, living things. Abiotic factors are the non-living things like the atmosphere, the temperature, non-living thing. It looks like the amount of moisture, precipitation, amount of light. All of those things together determine how productive an ecosystem is going to be. And remember, when we talk about productivity, we're talking about, first of all, how much plant life can be in the area, and then that, of course, is going to determine how much animal life can be in an area. Now, just some basic terms that you've had before, and we just need to make sure we still have them. Habitat is a place where an organism lives. It includes both, could involve discussion of both biotic and abiotic factors. Normally we think abiotic, like the surroundings, but obviously this wolf's habitat has a lot of bioticness all around it, all these plants and so on. So, biotic and abiotic factors. Niche is an organism's occupation or its job in an ecosystem, what it does, its position in the food web. Is it a predator? Is it a prey item? Is it both? Is it what kind of requirements does it need to survive? What kind of temperature requirements? What kind of shelter requirements? What kind of water requirements? Things like that. What does it eat? How does it eat? Things of that nature. So everything that an organism does, what it requires, things like that, those are an organism's niche. Okay, so habitat and niche, two really fundamental terms. Now, well, I just gave you the answer, didn't I? Who can share a niche? The answer is nobody can. A niche is, for an organism, for a species, I should say, is going to be very particular. And no two different species can do exactly the same thing in their habitat. They can't do exactly the same thing because one species will always do something that is slightly better than the other one, and thus will outcompete it. Okay? Now, many species can share very similar niches to the point where it may appear to us that they are doing the same thing, but in fact, they are doing something slightly different that allows them to coexist in a particular area at the same time. For example, perhaps we have two birds that we see hanging around the same tree and they look like they're doing basically the same thing. But if this bird is basically eating insects and things that are near the top of the tree, whereas this bird is mainly eating organisms that are found down at the base of the tree, then really, even though to us superficially they might look like they're doing the exact same thing, they really are not competing directly with each other. It's close, but not exactly. Okay? So, now, talking about a community, okay? Different species within an environment. Those are a community, okay? We're going to kind of ignore the non-living components of the community for right now. And they do interact with each other all the time. And those interactions affect the ecosystem as a whole. Now, there are three main categories of interaction we talk about when we talk about community level interactions between different species. Remember, a community level interaction, we're talking about between different species. We're not talking about two squirrels competing with each other. We're talking about a squirrel interacting with a robin or something like that. Okay, so the three main categories of community level interactions we'll talk about are competition. We kind of just touched on that a little bit when we were talking about niches, and can two organisms share the same niche? They cannot, because one would outcompete the other. I should say two species. Predation and symbiosis, and we're going to talk about all three of these. Okay, so competition, I think everybody's probably pretty comfortable with what that means. When organisms of the same species or different, but remember right now we're talking about the level of the community, so let's focus on members of different species, attempt to use the same resource at the same place at the same time. For example, these two buzzards are attempting to use the same piece of prey item or a scavenged dead carcass at the same time, okay? Now, remember we mentioned no two different species can use the same niche at the same exact time, okay? This is called the competitive exclusion principle. No two species can occupy exactly the same niche and the same habitat at the same time, because one of them will outcompete the other. Somebody's going to do that job just a little bit better than the other. There will be a winner and a loser, and eventually the loser will be outcompeted. Okay? Predation, we know what that is too. One organism captures and feeds on another. So you have a predator who does the eating and the prey item who is eaten. And there we go. We've got a predator and a prey item. It looks like one lizard is eating another different kind of lizard. That's really a bummer. Okay, so predator, prey, predation. Now, this is where we need to spend a bit of time. Symbiosis. We've talked about this already in class a little bit when we were talking about, if you will recall, the nitrogen fixing bacteria and its symbiotic relationship with certain types of plants. We talked about that. Symbiosis is any relationship in which two different species, not the same species, two different species, a plant and a bacteria, for example, live in a very close association together. There are three types of symbiosis. So symbiosis is an overarching term, and there are three types, more specific types of symbiosis: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Okay? Now, mutualism we talked about in class. It is a symbiotic relationship in which both of the members benefit. It is a mutual benefit, mutualism, okay? Examples, flowers and their pollinators. The bee here is getting from the flower nectar that it needs, food for energy. The flower, as the bee goes from flower to flower, is getting its pollen transferred from one flower to the next, so the flower is able to reproduce, okay? The plant is able to reproduce. So it is a mutualistic relationship. The bee gets food, the flower gets pollinated, it gets to reproduce. Acacia trees and ants. In Africa, there is a particular type of tree called an acacia tree, and they have these enormous hollow thorns, and in these thorns live ant colonies. And so the acacia tree provides the ants with a place to live. In addition to that, I don't see any on these leaves in this photo, but on the leaves there are often these little packets of food that the plant produces that the ants will harvest and take back to the hollow thorns to feed on and so on. Now, so the tree is providing shelter and food for these ants. What do the ants provide the tree? Protection. If another organism, another insect tries to get on this tree and eat the leaves, the ants will just devour it. They will attack it, and it won't do any harm to the tree. So the ants give the tree protection from other herbivorous insects and so on, and the tree gives the ants shelter and food. That is a mutualistic relationship. Okay, alrighty. Commensalism. In this case, it is a symbiotic relationship in which one member benefits and the other member is like, whatever. In this case, we've got examples. If you've ever seen pictures of barnacles growing on a whale, and I don't know why I didn't get a picture of that. What I do have is a picture of a scallop, which is the big pink thing here, but it's got two barnacles growing on its shell. And as far as scientists have determined, the barnacles really don't harm the organism they grow on. But the barnacles benefit greatly. They have a place to anchor themselves, and they require that to survive. So that's supposed to be a commensal relationship. Another commensal relationship, the cattle egrets, these birds that hang out with these oxen and other cattle, as the cattle stir up insects as they walk around, the cattle egrets will eat the insects that are stirred up, so the birds benefit, but the cows are really not gaining anything. The birds are just kind of walking around and eating the insects that are stirred up as the cattle move around through the grass. There are some birds that actually will pick parasites off of large mammals like this, but this is not one of those. So it's more of just a commensal relationship where one benefits and the other is like, whatever, okay? Now, parasitism is another type of symbiosis entirely in which one member of the relationship benefits and the other member is actually harmed. And of course, I suspect all of us have had some experience with the tick, either on ourselves or on a pet. The tick is taking nutrients, blood from you or your pet that rightfully belong to you or your pet, and so you are being harmed while the tick obviously is being benefited with a food source. Various types of worms, tapeworms like that, again, get in the digestive tract of a vertebrate, a mammal, whatever, your dog, and take the nutrients that the dog should be getting. And so you can actually see the dog not gain weight or whatever because the tapeworms may be taking so much of the nutrients that would rightfully belong to the dog. Okay? So I think what I'm going to do is break this up actually into two. I didn't think I would, but I think I am. So I'm going to stop there, and then we will address this question in the next podcast. So thanks for watching. I will see you in the next podcast. Take care.